Welcome to Master Your Merger, the podcast for leaders navigating the people side of mergers and acquisitions. Each week, your host Klint Kendrick talks with deal makers, HR leaders, and integration experts to uncover what really works when it comes to people, culture, and performance during a deal. From retaining top talent to aligning leadership, you'll hear real stories and actionable insights from the people doing the work, all designed to help you make your merger work. If you're leading through M&A, this is your weekly playbook.
Welcome to the Master Your Merger podcast. Today, we're talking about a part of M&A that often gets treated as a downstream workstream, when in reality, it has a major influence on how the deal is understood inside the organization. I'm joined by Cass Bailey, founder and CEO of Slice Communications, who's worked with leadership teams through acquisitions, integrations, and transition moments, while also navigating transactions in her own business, including selling and later reacquiring her company. In this conversation, we're going to look at how communication choices get made during a deal, which audiences leaders need to think about when planning needs to start, and what it takes to equip leaders to communicate clearly when the uncertainty is high. Cass, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Clint. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. We did a little bit of chatting beforehand, and you've got a really fascinating story, Cass. So let's start there. You've seen deals both as an advisor to other companies and inside your own business. So what first pulled you into M&A related communications, and what makes you want to stick around?
Early in my career, I had the opportunity to work in technology-based economic development. I have a degree in international politics, economics, and philosophy, so economic development made a lot of sense for me early in my career. My organization that I was with, we were investing in companies, we were pulling together angel funds, we were working with companies that were trying to scale and grow, especially technology startups. And I got to see some exits there and be part of exits, and even got to work on a tombstone ad early on in terms of the organization that I was working with and the deals that we had done and the exits that we had achieved. And so my community in the early days was very focused on technology startups and technology entrepreneurs. And then when I got to work in a PR firm later on, I also continued to work with technology companies and startups, and that was just my community. And so this talk of selling and buying and acquiring and rolling off divisions or merging them together has always been part of my professional experience from my very early days.
It's fantastic stuff. I don't want to bury the lead. So you mentioned selling your company and then buying it back. And
Yeah.
I've been on the flip side of that, in corporate world, every once in a while, you'll buy something that maybe isn't the strategic fit you thought it would be. So you spin that out. So
Mhm.
I would love to hear about you selling and then buying your company back.
Sure. So our company was founded in 2008. And 2008, if you remember, was a horrible time to start a company. It was February, so we didn't know just how bad it was going to be, but it was pretty rough. So 2008, 2009, we just kind of like made it through offering a great product, really strong communications, but at a very, very reasonable price. And in 2010, we started to grow the company. We were like, okay, here's what we got. There's some opportunities. The economy is bouncing back. This is a great opportunity for us. And so we started growing and like really scaling this company as best we could. And it was doing so well that in 2012, we had an advisory board. We were very fortunate to have some very, very smart advisors help us to grow this business. One of our advisory board members put us in contact with a media company who was really struggling in terms of their social media presence and the social media programs they were selling to their sponsors. And so they had a big problem, and they called us in the fall to help with one of the programs that they had sold that was failing and not doing well. And we said, okay, well, this is how you do it. You switch these two parts and you change this thing and you make this thing the prize instead of that thing the prize, whatever it was. And they were like, oh my gosh. And that thing just exploded and ended up being award winning and did really, really well. And at that time, I did have a business partner, and she and I were really struggling. We didn't know that much about business, frankly. We were communications and marketing folks. And we were like, well, we want to scale the business, but we really just have no idea how to do it. So the media company that was our client, they decided to acquire us. And they had done a number of acquisitions over the years. They had acquired other services companies and other media properties. And so we entered into this agreement where we maintained some equity and we were still working in the business, my partner and I. We did no due diligence on them at all whatsoever. That's probably a very common thing that you see in
Yeah.
entrepreneurial acquisitions, is that the entrepreneurs do no due diligence. We did none. We didn't ask any of the hard questions. There wasn't really an integration plan. Actually, there was no integration plan, not one that we developed, not one that they developed, not one that we talked about, not one that we were like executing against. All of these things are things that I've learned since then. And so about 14 months, and I happened to get married for the first time during 2013, right after the acquisition. And so when I came back from my honeymoon, like the business was not doing well, but we also weren't getting any financial reporting and we didn't see any P&Ls and we didn't know what was really going on in the business. By that fall, we all decided that this was not a good fit.
Mhm.
It just wasn't going to work out. The opportunities that we saw for strategic integration and that I thought would happen in terms of how the two companies would work together just weren't feasible in terms of the operations. So, in I guess December of 2013, we started conversations for me to purchase the company. And it was a scary thing. I never meant to be a solo business owner. I certainly still didn't know very much about running a business. But I had gotten a call the day that we were starting to negotiate from a new client who said, "Yep, we want to work with you. We're going to sign this contract." And it gave me the confidence I needed. So
Oh,
by
that's great.
February, yeah, by February 28th in 2014, the company was mine 100%.
Wow, that's a really fascinating, Cass. And you're right. I hear it all the time, right? The sellers and the buyers, you assume that because you get along really well, that it'll all work itself out, but that doesn't always work out that way.
It does not. And people who are visionary thinkers, who tend to be entrepreneurs in a lot of cases, do have that belief that like, oh, I see the vision for the benefit, the value that's going to be created by this deal. But if you don't have somebody on that deal team who's really focused on here's the integration, here's the process, here's, how it's going to work, and here are the landmines that we might run into, then it just doesn't work. And
Right.
I learned that the hard way.
Well, and that's part of why we have the success rate in M&A is as low as it is. I've
So
seen,
low.
yeah, it's shifted in the last probably decade or so. It used to be we talked about failure rates of 70 to 90. We're now seeing failure rates about 60%. So
Mhm.
the numbers have gotten better, which is
They
good
have.
news. And hopefully through these kinds of conversations, we'll see those
Mhm.
numbers continuing to grow for successes.
And
So
that,
oh,
yeah.
please.
That's such a smart point though, that like, yes, it is better, but 60% of them are still failing.
Right.
And a lot of times, especially entrepreneurs who are going into this deal, like they don't think that they will ever be part of that 60%. How could
For sure.
they? They've been so successful growing their business. And so it's a hard reminder for them. And even corporate buyers who are like, yeah, 60% just aren't going to make it, to have that conversation too. But 40% are making it. So we're getting closer and closer to 50-50.
Exactly. And hopefully over time we'll be able to shift that so that, it's hey, 70 to 90% of these do really well because we've figured out that, hey, let's pay a little bit more attention to integration and what you and I are both passionate about, the people.
Yeah.
So Cass, I am curious, I find that folks that have been through this journey themselves approach M&A work a little bit differently. What did those experiences teach you that you've taken forward to working with your clients? And you've also inorganically grown Slice. So you've done your own acquisitions. What have you carried forward?
Oh, so many things, Clint. With the clients, I tend to have a real empathy, and our team has real empathy for them because we've been through it, both buying and selling. And so we understand the fear, how much fear is tied up in M&A. And it is a tremendous amount. People are afraid of losing their jobs, or they're afraid of not having the same benefits they had under the same owner. They're afraid of hating their manager. But even the people who are doing the acquisition are afraid that they didn't get what they tried to buy, that there were misrepresentations, not just financially, but in terms of culture and what people can deliver and how they deliver. There's so much fear that goes completely ignored in most M&A deals. And people are up at night all throughout this process, from before the LOI, through the deal being closed, and then usually like 6 to 12 months afterwards, they're still being kept up at night. And a lot of that is fear-based. And so when you think about a communication strategy, which is what we do, it's very much about alleviating fear and creating transparency, or acknowledging fear and creating transparency. Either one is okay, but practicing like these highly emotionally charged conversations that always happen around M&A. Sometimes it's fear, but sometimes you find arrogance in these situations, which create resistance in others. Sometimes it's just a natural skepticism that certain employees or leaders bring to everything, and anything that they could possibly, have to talk about. But that's the big thing, the emotional aspect of it. And so even in our own deals, when I take a look and I talk to the employees and the owners that we're trying to buy from, I understand that like they're afraid. And for most people, not everybody, but for most people, this is the only time they'll do this sort of transaction in their lives. I mean, that's why they hire people like you, Clint, right? Like you've done a lot of these and you know what it takes. But for a lot of people, it's the only one they've ever done. And so really understanding it and approaching it with care and concern, and this idea of like, yep, I get you. You're going to have a hard time through this. Everybody does. And that is completely normal, is a big part of how we build communication strategies.
That's good stuff. And really that empathy I'm hearing come across really, really clearly. So one of the things when when I talk with leaders about communications,
Yeah.
when I talk to leaders about M&A, and I ask for tips, one of the tips I most frequently hear is, communicate, communicate, communicate. Um, so it's something people understand is important, but where are some places that maybe you see people underestimating the importance of communication during deals?
This is a people like to talk the talk, but not walk the walk
Okay.
thing. Because, like you said earlier in the introduction, that communications ends up being a downstream thing. What we find is that the people who do this the best engage either internal or external communications experts who have done M&A before, and they
Yes.
engage them a little before LOI. That's the ideal time to do it. Now, if this deal is going to close super duper quick, it needs to be at least 90 days prior to deal closing. And you need to have a communications roadmap. Everybody should have a communications roadmap. It should address a couple of things, and it should address the cultural gaps. Like there should be some due diligence, some cultural due diligence, and some communications due diligence, where you look at the internal and external communications that both firms do and see where is there a gap. Does one firm, does the firm that's getting acquired, do they have a super robust Slack channel? Do they have an amazing SharePoint where people are talking all the time? Are they putting out newsletters? Are they having town halls? Does the other firm not do that at all? We need to know those things. What is the typical internal communications that happens between both firms? We also do need to look at external communications. Does one firm do they put out a lot of press releases? Are they at a lot of trade shows? Are they going and speaking at a lot of conferences? Are they attending webinars? They have a regular ongoing webinar, and the other firm doesn't have any of those things. That is I'm going to say an orange flag of cultural misalignment. Because if one is super communicative and the other one isn't at all, or if one's really communicative internally and the other one's really communicatively externally, we need to know those things. The second thing is that we need to look at the values beyond the stated values. Everybody has values on their wall. Most people don't know what those values actually are, how they actually work, what they actually mean. And so we want to do a little interviewing, especially of the managers or people who might have a reason to know these things, HR in particular, what the unstated culture is, because if there are gaps there. So the first step in your communications roadmap is, where are the cultural gaps and where are the communications gaps? Where's their misalignment? Because that needs to be part of the strategy, is bringing those things into alignment, those ways and hows and frequencies of communication, as quickly as possible. Then the question that I always get, Clint, is like, who do I tell when?
Yeah.
And I add to that question, and how? How do you tell them? This is not an email communication in most instances. It should not be an email communication. And it's also not a mass communication. It's not something that you really should do all at once. So we guide our clients to say, okay, we know the cultural gaps. Now let's work with both buyer and seller on messaging. right? That's the thing that most people do, and they leave it at that. And then it's who knows when, how. And so we might bring in a group of leaders early on and say, hey, we're going to do this. And we have to prepare the deal team to communicate with those leaders and to have adverse reactions from those leaders and to know how to handle those adverse reactions from those leaders. And then we need to have those leaders trained on how to tell the managers and how to handle adverse reactions from those managers, or a peppering of questions, or a complete silent shutdown. And then we have to have the managers trained. So like there is a process in which you do this that really makes it so that everybody understands the what's in it for them and is committed. And it might sound like, oh, Cass, we don't have time for that. You have time for the first two tiers. I promise you do, if you prioritize them in your deal.
Yeah, it's so critical. We've talked quite a bit the role of the middle manager
Oh,
in
yeah.
ensuring that these are successful. So I love that you're calling that out. And you're right, it is a matter of prioritizing and making time. Those are the folks that employees trust the most to understand what's going on. And when we leave them in a lurch, it just doesn't go well for anybody.
Not at all. And so our recommendation usually on the communications playbook is that the leaders either meet with the managers, dispersed however you can do it, the day of the announcement,
Mm.
so that they are given a toolkit. And the toolkit says, here are the FAQs. Here's what it means for you. Like, this is how you communicate with your clients. This is how you communicate with your employees. And if possible, like do some role playing with them. So we train the trainers to do the role playing with them, or to set up that time the day after the announcement comes out. Ideally, it's the day before, the day of, or the day after. It's somewhere in that 72-hour period. Has to be a priority with the middle managers. Otherwise, the rest of the communications plan falls apart. And people say, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so busy, I'm so busy. It's like, yeah, if you had planned properly and if you had put this time on everybody's calendar ahead of time, calling it something else, then you wouldn't have been too busy to do this critically important thing. You would have had a plan. You would have had integration. And then you check in with those people 72 hours after the announcement. You ask them for feedback. You put that feedback into a shared document where you're then drafting FAQs that then go back out to that whole management team. That is the methodology for integration and the iterative nature of communication that is critical for M&A.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been doing a good bit of work on the concept of integration debt and the basic idea that if you make integration decisions that I'm going to call them unintentional for now, right? If we don't intentionally direct integration, we don't intentionally resource it, then we end up spending way more money than we need to.
Oh my gosh.
And that under resourcing is one of the things that we've heard in a lot of our interviews. So for firms that aren't able to prioritize those communications pieces, I just have to remind them you've probably spent millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars picking up this company. You need to spend some money on the integration as well.
Absolutely. And this integration is not a one-time thing. Transfer of trust happens over time. And that's what we're talking about here is transfer of trust. And it can take 6 months to earn somebody's trust. It can take a year to earn their trust. And that all is part of this integration. Yes, you've got integration debt, but the debt in a lot of cases is based on an not successfully transferring trust.
Yeah. Absolutely one of the factors. Well, so you started talking about planning, Cass. So
Yes.
you mentioned a 90-day window before close would be
Mhm.
fantastic. Would love to hear more about what you think for the timelines and maybe some signals that the company is running behind or they're doing well, or, what are some of the kind of red flag, green flags here?
So one of the key points to look at is, are the buyer and seller aligned in terms of messaging? Like truly aligned. And if there's not alignment 60 days out, like you're going to be in some trouble because you can't build toolkits and you can't plan events and you can't train managers when you don't have messaging aligned. So if somebody doesn't have a set of truly aligned messaging, and you know whether or not it's truly aligned or not, and maybe that's a good reason to bring an external consultant to be like, hey, y'all think it's aligned, but it's not because I see these gaps and you all want the deal to go through and that's fine, but these gaps exist. That's a key critical moment. The second thing is that if the HR packages aren't ready, I would say like 3 weeks in advance, you're also going to be in trouble. Because I'll tell you a quick story. We worked with a client. They were proudly employee owned. Okay, part of their brand, employee owned, employee owned. But they were going to have an issue. And so they had to sell the company. Now, they were selling the company to a strategic buyer, and that strategic buyer was a big national player who, had been the competitor for many, many years in this idea that we're not like them, we're employee owned, we're not like them. And suddenly they were going to be like them, right? They were going to be part of that company. And so we got involved about 90 days out. We worked with the deal team. We really worked on messaging alignment a lot. We built out the playbook. And we decided that the best way, because the how you communicate matters in some cases as much as what you communicate. We decided the how was going to be an in-person event. Because this was part of the company's culture. They were always in an office company. They were always people who got together. They had annual meetings and picnics and holiday parties and all of that. So we decided to plan an internal event, and we picked the venue on their behalf because we wanted to have a certain energy, because all space has energy. And we decided on the menu, for instance, because we wanted the food to be high protein, healthy, not sugar, not a lot of carbs, right? Like we didn't want anybody crashing during this conversation. It's that important,
Yeah,
Clint.
it
To
is.
think about everything that goes into the emotional experience of hearing this news.
Yeah.
And so then we planned the run a show, which means who spoke when, how. We had one of our writers write for each one of the leaders. We put together the sales deck, the presentation deck. We worked on the AV, but we had to make sure that we had packets, HR packets on the tables that were exactly specific to the people that were going to be at those tables so that they could take them home with them. And they were all personalized. And so even the table seating was a very important decision. We needed to have the right managers at the right tables with the right centers of influence, right? That was critically important. And so we went through this whole announcement, and people were crying with happiness because it meant that their employee stock was able to be cashed out, because that's really what we focused on. And that we focused on their life-changing ability to invest in their families or to retire or to pay for their kids' college because of this deal. And so we really, really focused on the what's in it for them. At the same time, that company also changed CEOs. They promoted somebody from internal. The acquired company promoted somebody internally. And so we also had this opportunity to set his stage and his vision. They had a major competitor who was coming after their people and their clients, blood in the water, right?
Yep.
And a year after the acquisition, they still had 98% of their clients retained. And the CEO is getting an A+ rating. And the company is doing very, very well. They're one of the best performing divisions of the overall bigger company. But they were so intentional, right? They made such good choices and good investments to say, we care so much about our people, both our employees and our clients, the people at our clients, that we're going to make the investment to have this go better than any acquisition that's ever been done by this company before. And they did. They were so thoughtful.
Yeah, that's terrific to hear. And it's not luck, right? It's planning.
No, there was nothing lucky about it. And I'll tell you, when we brought the managers in a week in advance of the major announcement to tell them and to do training with them. We trained them on energy management. We answered, we let them get all of their fear-based, anxiety-based questions out in that context so that they had enough time to process it and be prepared for when their employees asked them those things. And we did energy management with them. We did body language management with them. We did role playing with them, because all of it was part of the communication. I don't know if you're familiar with the Albert T. Morabian study, Clint, about how people communicate.
The name sounds familiar, but please.
Yeah. So what this study showed is that a huge percentage, a majority of what you communicate is actually your body language, your face, your eye movements, your hand movements, whether you're smiling or not. 30% roughly is your voice, how loud or soft or quick or slow you are in terms of how your voice is, and 7% is what you say. So when you're communicating in an M&A situation, it matters so much more, the expression on your face, than the words coming out of your mouth in that initial communication. Because what happens is that people get a burst of adrenaline when they hear news like this. They actually get a little fight or flight or freeze or fawn, and they don't hear the words other than the first sentence. And so we trained the managers that your team will not hear you. past the first sentence when you tell them this.
Yeah.
This is why this communication has to be iterative in order to transfer trust. You can't just say it once because they will not hear you. Their
Yeah.
body's being flooded with chemicals.
Absolutely. Our brains literally shut off when we hear this kind of news.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
And
then what
that's
do we
why the
do?
integration plan has to be ongoing as it relates to communication.
Absolutely. Well, and then what do we do when we hear the news and our brain snaps out of it? The first thing we do is we pick up our phone and we text somebody that we care about with a message that's something like OMG, we just got acquired. Right? I'm
That's
not hearing anything happening on
That
stage.
is exactly right. And so in that moment, good salespeople can't send emails to their good clients,
Right.
right? They can't. Their brains shut down. They're too overwhelmed. And
Right.
so part of what we do in the communications roadmap is figure out who needs to get communication around this announcement directly, in what timing, and then we write that communication in advance. We write those scripts, we write those emails. So the salespeople just have to copy and paste, and then the communication's gone out and like do a little, and then we track to see like which of the most important clients have gotten that communication. It's the manager's job to track that. That's one example. Another example is with suppliers, right? Your suppliers need to know this information and they need to know like what it means for them. Well, it's really hard for the supply chain folks sometimes to be like, I don't know what this means for them. Nobody's told me what it means for my suppliers. Well, the communications toolkit will have an email that goes out to suppliers. And that like part of that email sets up a meeting for 3 or 4 days from the announcement so that those people know and have the trust that their clients at the acquired company will talk to them in a couple of days and give them the whole story.
Yeah.
It's all part of the communication that has to happen so that everybody gets it consistently. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I love that this is right. This is the ideal. This is the dream. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some teams that have the muscle memory to do this time after time. I'd love to hear about the flip side for a moment, Cass. So what about those situations where you're called in and you're sitting here with your fire hose, right? It's all on fire and you've got to help put those out because maybe the planning didn't go as well as what you just described.
Yeah, there are times that we get called in late and that we get called after the fact. Usually it's by like a board of directors who are like, this is not going well because they're being told that like, yeah, everything's going fine. And they're like, no, it doesn't feel like it's going fine at all.
Right.
Can you please come in and help? And so the first thing that we try to do is have a very candid conversation with the leadership about what's been done to date and exactly how, and we have to push them. Clint, it's like 20 questions to get people to tell you like what actually went on during the announcement and leading up to the announcement. And then we really need to push on the marketing communications folks. And we really need to understand who are the people who are influencing this communication internally, who are the big, because if it's going wrong, it's typically the skeptics. It's the skeptics who have gotten the people who haven't decided yet to all come to their side and decide this is a terrible idea. And so we have to know who the skeptics are because they have to be neutralized. It's not going to work if they can't be neutralized. And then we need to figure out like, what did you tell these people?
Right.
And how? Like, what did you say? And how did you say it? Because at some point, your trust in them broke or their trust in you completely broke. So what did you say to break it? And they're going to be like, no, they didn't understand. Sometimes leadership is like, no, they didn't understand. They didn't understand. It's like, no, they understood completely what you told them by how you told them. Basically that they don't matter because you sent them an email after it had already hit the market. Like, I'm going to tell you that's what typically happens where you sent an email. Your managers weren't prepared. They didn't know what to say. There's no FAQs. Everybody's really confused. They're scared. They're all going to leave. Like that's when we get called in.
Yeah.
So that threat of they're all going to leave, the value of the deal is going to walk out the door is the issue.
Yeah.
And so, right, the first thing we have to do, and we've been doing crisis communications for 23 years now, Clint. So we treat it like a crisis situation because it is one, but it's a self-inflicted crisis situation. And we've got 6 people on our team who each have more than 20 years of crisis experience. So like there's depth here. So we take a look and we say, okay, first we have to triage. We have to triage this crisis. We need to understand what's being said and get out some sort of message very, very quickly, especially to leaders and managers and people of influence. There's a couple golden rules in crisis communications. One is you have to validate concern and show action. That is the golden rule that comes into most situations as it relates to an M&A integration gone wrong. Validate concern. Yeah, we screwed up. We should not have told you that way. We should not have communicated in this way. You did not deserve to hear it this way. Here's what we're going to do instead, and here's what we're going to do differently. That is the triaging of the message that needs to happen very, very quickly. And then it's about starting to listen. Listening is such an important part of crisis cleanup, especially internally. So listening happens on a couple of different fronts. One, we can do some passive social and AI listening. So we can actually figure out how people are talking about your company online. And also if they're using AI search tools or even Copilot or something like that, like what they're searching for in terms of this issue and this topic. We can start to see if Glassdoor reviews have gone up and what people are saying there too. Then we want to get the fire holders, the people who believe in the value of this deal, to sit down ideally with a skeptic or somebody who has been convinced by a skeptic and start to collect the information. And we give them a little questionnaire that they can use verbally. What did you hear? Well, how did this feel? What happened? What are you thinking? Those sort of things. And we try to collect as much of that information as we can as quickly as possible. And then we need to build an action plan. Leadership needs to commit to an action plan if they're going to keep these people. And usually within 30, 45 days, we can get this sort of thing turned around if it's not too far gone. And if people haven't done things that were horribly, horribly offending to their employees.
Right. It's so seldom that there was somebody malicious, right? I've run into that really
No,
once in my career, but it goes to your point at the very beginning about having somebody helping manage your communications that has done this
this
work
before.
before, meaning working in the M&A context.
Yeah. Most internal and external comms folks and CMOs, they've never done this.
Right.
They don't know where the landmines lie. They don't know that the how is really that important. They think of it like any other change communications, and it's just
Right.
not, because it's existential. It's like, is my company going to exist? Is my job going to exist? Or is it not? And what does this mean? We
Yeah.
have a thing that's worked pretty well in the past, which is kind of a buddy system or a round robin between two companies. So we'll say, okay, here's the acquired company, here's the acquiring company, here are the teams that are going to interface.
Yeah.
Let's do a round robin where every week you get paired up to meet one-on-one, and we'll send you $10 coffee cards or just virtual conversations to have that one-to-one communication, because once the humanity connects, the trust can start rebuilding.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a really big fan of several of the things you've mentioned. The buddy programs are a really good one, whether you do that 1 week
Yeah.
at a time or for a 6-month run. And I
Yeah.
really appreciated you talking about having some places for the people who are feeling skeptical to be heard. That's one of the
Yes.
techniques I've used when integrations have gone poorly is, hey, bring in all of the folks who are detractors from this work that we're doing. And let's have a focus group with those folks because quite often they're detracting because they don't feel like they've been heard. It also gives you a
That's
really
right.
good sense of what is the message that these people are sending out to the rest of the organization, and it helps you with your messaging to help deal with some things that maybe aren't accurate, or maybe they are
Yeah.
accurate and you didn't realize
Mhm.
how much certain parts of the integration were going to just really upset people unnecessarily.
That's Yeah, that's exactly right. And there are some people who are just skeptical by nature, and everybody knows that they're skeptical. So you're kind of like, okay, they're going to be them. And
Yeah.
sure, we just need to neutralize them a little bit. But the people that come out in a way that is really angry and perhaps malicious, and we've seen this too, is because they feel like they've been done wrong or they've
Yeah.
been passed over,
Yeah.
that they should have had this opportunity. They should have been the one to run the next generation of this business. And, they don't understand why they weren't chosen. And so they're hurt. They're really hurt. So give them a place to speak to the hurt.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
diffuses the
So
anger.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a whole different conversation about how often we get angry when really inside there's some hurt underneath it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but that's probably outside the time we have for this particular conversation. So,
Mhm.
but on a related note, Cass, you talked a bit about this transfer of trust.
Yes.
And so I think about that. I think about other milestones for integration. And there seems to be this point where you intuitively know that at least the early parts of the integration are done, that the cultures are starting to come together, the
Mhm.
employees are starting to adopt the new identity. So when you think about the transition communications and that, how do you know
Mhm.
that they've reached a natural end point, as opposed to leaders that are like, okay, I'm done. I'm going to go work on something else, because those are two different moments most of the time.
Yeah. So transition communications and the transfer of trust is something that, yes, has to happen over time and requires a lot of feedback. So, and we think of this internally, absolutely, but it starts to show up externally. And let me tell you how. When you have earned the trust of these employees that you've acquired, they start to speak well on your behalf to each other and to their clients. And they start to say things like, "Oh, we have this like cool new program that we're able to roll out because of this new owner that we have. You need to stay on for this." Or, "Oh, we're doing this awesome new conference and I would love to have you as my guest." And so you start to see it show up that way as much as possible, and those folks who are external facing, where they're saying, "Yes, let's do this." We also start to see ERGs pop up between the two companies. So employee resource groups pop up between the two companies, and they say, "Yes, like we all have an interest in this thing. We want to go do this thing, or we're all similar in this way. We want to go do this thing." And it's like, okay, that means that they feel safe enough, that they trust that we will love and take care of their ERG, and that they feel safe enough that they can trust to tell their clients to come meet them at this conference or this event, or to really promote this new product or service. If you're starting to see that you're introducing a new product or service and like your employees are not talking about it to their clients, you have not gotten that trust yet. They're not willing to put their neck on the line with the clients other than what they have to do in their day-to-day job. So start to look at some of those things. Another thing to look at is just how quickly you're able to hire after a transaction. And if it takes a long time, chances are somebody in the ether is saying something that's not good about y'all, that they're saying, like, "Oh, no, they just got bought. It's terrible over there. Don't go there." Yes, it'll show up in the number of resumes, but it'll really show up in the amount of time it takes to fill a job. But if you're getting a great reputation, employees are saying, "Oh my gosh, I love my job. These changes have been amazing. I feel really valued in my job," then that'll speed up. So those are some KPIs to start to look at.
I love that. Well, Cass, I have a feeling we could chat all day, but we're running close to the end of time. Normally near the end, I ask for like your big tip for other people. But given that you've done so much inorganic growth for your own company, I would love to hear what's one habit that you changed in the way that Slice does deals as a result of some of these lessons that you've learned.
We started looking differently at our ideal acquisition profile. So who are
Okay.
the types of companies that we want to acquire, and we build a red flag, green flag process for us as we go through due diligence that we are very stringent about. So that's been a helpful thing. And then we build our own operations playbooks. Dana Schmidt, she's our COO, and I have that tendency to be like the big vision, of course it'll
Yeah.
work out person, and Dana is that here's exactly how it's going to work out integration person, and she's in integration for the long term. So we had acquired a firm in August 1st of 2025. It's now April 13th, 2026, and she is in phase 3 of her integration plan for this company. Not phase 1, not phase 2. We're into phase 3, and it's going really well. And we've gotten feedback from somebody who works with the company we most recently acquired saying like this is the best onboarding of a new job that like I've ever had, and that this is a place that makes me feel really cared about, and you all have done this really well. And he sees the what's in it for him. He sees the growth opportunity that he has. So I think that's a really important thing is when I'm acquiring a company, I don't do it by myself, right? We have a whole team that does it. And that ultimately what you're looking for is for people to say, like, this was great. I loved this. And to proactively tell you, like, this was exactly, I didn't think I needed it and I didn't think I wanted it, but turns out it's exactly what I needed because
Ah,
it's going to give me this growth opportunity. Yeah.
I love that. Love that. Well, Cass, thanks so much for spending time with me today. If our listeners would like to reach out, where can they find you and your work?
They can find us on slicecommunications.com. I'm also one of the easiest people to find on the internet. So just look for Cass Bailey PR, Cass Bailey Communications. I will pop up. And anybody, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's why I'm there to help and share and to help everybody grow. One of our core company values and one of the things that makes us different is that we elevate everyone. And I'm really here if you need any help. So thank you.
Awesome. And we'll make sure we've got links to all that in the show notes. Cass, again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Clint.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Merger, hosted by Klint Kendrick. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this valuable, share it with someone leading through a deal. To explore toolkits, resources, and upcoming programs, including our free roundtables, visit masteryourmerger.com. We'll see you next time.